What a mysterious mess the Mario universe has proven itself to be. If you haven't seen the videos that got us to this point, we've untangled the web of the Kong family tree, mapped out a speculative history of the core Mario planet, and taken a detour into the baffling depths of the role-playing spin-offs. But now, it's time to push this as far as humanly possible, and follow every single thread to reach the absolute edges of the possible Mario canon. Now, this one's a doozy. And I acknowledge that with most of this stuff, we're clearly outside the bounds of quote-unquote actual intended canon. However, by the end, we're gonna bring this thing full circle and have a mind-boggling revelation or two that might just tie it all together. I promise. So, with that in mind, welcome back to the Mario map. Something I emphasized in my first map video pretty heavily was the idea that Wario has a pretty deep connection to aliens, whether it be Tatanga, Orbulon, or even Bomberman. And while this next piece of lore obviously got scrapped before being officially implemented, the recent reveal of a scrapped character, Wa-Peach, designed by the same artist behind Waluigi, confirms my theory even further. She was originally designed for Mario Power Tennis, as a new character who would act as Wario and Waluigi's boss. And she was meant to be a being of explicitly alien origin. I really like this idea, and I wish the character had been fully realized, although I have to say, the name Wa-Peach is just dreadful. Maybe they could have named her after either a sour fruit to contrast with Peach's name, or some kind of hostile or ugly plant to contrast with Daisy's name. I don't know. But either way, the Wario-alien connection deepens. And the other entities that have deep connections to space in this universe are rabbits. This, of course, is a nod to the moon rabbit of Asian folklore, and the Broodals from Odyssey aren't alone here. Space rabbits of this blue-headed variety also feature prominently in WarioWare, and these same exact bunnies show up in another quirky Nintendo series, Rhythm Heaven, roping that entire world into this universe as well. And of course, on the topic of rabbits generally, we've now seen multiple games where Mario and friends are doing battle with and against the Rabbids, which is still kind of weird to me, I have to admit. But given that the Rabbids themselves are an offshoot of the Rayman series, I'll take it, because this also means that everyone's favorite limbless thingamajig is along for the ride as well. Now, this bodes well for mascot character enthusiasts like myself, and our next section will bode even better. It's strange to think how far we've come since the height of the Toys to Life craze of the mid-2010s, and it's even stranger to think about these two Mario Skylanders toys. Bowser is rocking a full set of extremely evil and medieval seeming armor, and DK is wearing a yellow suit. Not to go on a tangent here, but you can't put DK in clothes. Not because he's not a fashionable chap or anything, but it just instantly raises the deeply uncomfortable question of why he isn't wearing clothes the rest of the time. Am I the only one who hates this? Anyway, the point is, Bowser and DK appear in Skylanders, which is something I know almost nothing about, outside of the fact that it's in some way related to Spyro the Dragon. And if you know anything about Spyro, when there's Spyro, there's Crash Bandicoot, with the two directly crossing over in Spyro Orange and Crash Purple, a pair of sister games for, appropriately, the Game Boy Advance. These Sony mascots of old are cool enough on their own, but they also open up a deeper pocket of lore. You see, in Jak and Daxter, you can actually find one of the plants from Crash Bandicoot as an Easter egg, and if you assume that this makes Jak canon as well, he was in PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale, an ill-fated Sony Smash Bros. Clone that could also tie in a whole slew of other games, including some absolutely bizarre ones, like BioShock. To stay consistent, I won't actually count All-Stars here, seeing as I didn't count Smash Bros. Itself, but believe me, the possibility of Parappa the Rapper and Patapon being canon really tempted me. However you slice it, that's all we got here. So, on to the next piece of the puzzle. Literally. In the first map video, we did scratch the surface of Mario's relation to puzzle games, specifically his oddly secondary vocation as a doctor in Dr. Mario, and the way that the Puyo Puyo series is canon, confirmed doubly through secondary links to both Kirby and Sonic. But we didn't follow these threads to their logical conclusions. Firstly, Puyo Puyo is, itself, a spin-off franchise of the Madu Monogatari series of dungeon-crawling RPGs. The characters and world here are exactly the same as in Puyo Puyo, so that's really nothing new as far as the map goes. However, these characters would, way later on, find themselves crossing over with the mother of all falling block puzzle games, in Puyo Puyo Tetris. Additionally, Tetris DS prominently featured a whole host of Nintendo-themed things, including Mario himself in the background. So, Tetris is in. I could hear the argument that Tetris isn't even a world at all and is merely just an abstraction. Games like Tetris Battle Gaiden, one of the best versions of Tetris by the way, prove otherwise. So yeah, all these characters, along with the infamous falling blocks themselves, are canon as far as our standards go. To circle back to Dr. Mario, there's a version of it on the Game Boy Advance called Dr. Mario and Puzzle League, or as it was released in its native release region of Japan, Dr. Mario and Panel de Pan. But these are merely two games bundled together on one cart, not necessarily games taking place in the same universe, right? And the same argument could actually be made about Nintendo Puzzle Collection, a Japanese-only GameCube game that bundles not only Dr. Mario and Panel de Pan once again, but includes Yoshi's Cookie as well. However, there is also this piece of art from a 1998 Satellaview broadcast, which clearly shows Lip, Panel de Pan's protagonist, alongside the main Mario cast. Admittedly, this is all somewhat flimsy, but let's go even further. Captain Rainbow, a Japanese-exclusive Wii game, features the titular Captain Rainbow encountering various obscure Nintendo characters throughout his journey. This not only includes Birdo, cementing Captain Rainbow itself back in the Mario universe, but also Lip. So, yeah, Panel de Pan, it's in. And Captain Rainbow itself also gives us a few bonus gems, namely infantry units from Famicom Wars, Takamaru from the mysterious Morisame Castle, and the Devil from Devil World. Pretty sick. I love Devil World personally. But if something devilish or demonic is also your style, you haven't even seen the half of it yet. Last time, we firmly established Kirby as a resident of this universe, and the Great Cave Offensive is a mode in Kirby Superstar, and importantly, its remake, Superstar Ultra, that came way later, that might single-handedly open up the biggest wormhole on this entire image. In it, there is a treasure trove of items for Kirby to find that come directly out of other Nintendo games. There's the green Koopa shell, which is relevant to us, of course, but how about the Falchion from Fire Emblem. This is the sword wielded by Marth, and obviously Fire Emblem is an extremely long-running franchise with an extensive cast of characters all its own. But the most interesting entry to us is going to be Tokyo Mirage Sessions. This game is essentially a crossover between Fire Emblem and Shin Megami Tensei. No big deal, right? Well, actually, SMT on its own could get an entire video about all the different series, sub-series, spin-offs, the books that act as the source material. Frankly, it's a disaster. But, long story short, if we have SMT, we have all of its related content, including Persona, Catherine, and the deeply interesting Jack Bros, a spin-off for the Virtual Boy, which definitely feels relevant to a Nintendo conversation. Plus, I love Jack Frost. And, speaking of the demons themselves from SMT, in all of these games, multiple pantheons of ancient gods and mythical creatures literally exist, meaning that everything from Norse mythology to Japanese folktales to the Judeo-Christian devil and god themselves are now canon in the Mario universe, I guess. Which coincides nicely with the fact that the Great Cave Offensive also features the Pegasus Wing from Kid Icarus as an item, balancing things out with a more heavenly touch. Skyworld presumably floats above the atmosphere of Mario's planet, and we'll squeeze more juice out of Kid Icarus in just a minute. But for now, let's finish up the Great Cave Offensive treasures. There's also Orihauken here, which may or may not be a Golden Sun reference. We'll say it is. As well as Captain Falcon's helmet, bringing in the F-Zero series. F-Zero also could have slipped in the back door via its strange connection to the Star Fox universe, but whatever floats your boat. The developers have said that James McCloud's appearance in F-Zero is merely a fun little nod, but again, with this video, we're way past that point. The last relevant treasure to us is the beloved Mr. Saturn, which ties in the cult classic Mother or Earthbound series. I just needed to refer to it as Earthbound to make the Hell, Heaven, and Earth joke work, so there it was. Not in the Cave Offensive itself, but still in the Kirby series as a minor thing, there's this Kirby costume that's clearly a reference to the Ice Climbers, and I really don't want to leave them out. So here you go. Ice Climber is canon. But doubling back for a second, remember I said we'd get back to Kid Icarus? Well, that's because since we're already deep in the weeds here, let's just get really bizarre for a minute. Captain N the Game Master was an animated series that, quite frankly, was pretty terrible. A lot like Captain Rainbow, who we discussed earlier, Captain N basically hangs out with a variety of gaming characters, including Pit from Kid Icarus. A horrifyingly cringy depiction of Kid Icarus's Medusa is also a prominent character. But on the friendly side, there was also Simon Belmont in the show, who we sort of discussed in the first video. And you know what? Let's sidebar for a second and talk more about that. I briefly touched on the extended Konami stuff via the Bomberman costumes last time around, but with Captain N as a secondary source, let's just say that Castlevania is totally canon. We could then use the Konami YY series of Konami crossover games to hook in tons of other Konami properties without relying on Bomberman at all. These games kind of rule, to be honest, and they feature stuff from Ganbare Goemon, one of my favorite series personally, and also Parodius, which is itself a parody of Gradius. Goemon and Gradius had Yu-Gi-Oh cards depicting their characters within that universe, so Yu-Gi-Oh is canon? I don't know. But back to Captain N. The other major character featured in it is Mega Man. At least some vile version of Mega Man where they apparently couldn't even get the fact that he's supposed to be blue right. On its own, I would totally disregard Captain N, to be honest. However, there's also this German comic strip that depicts Pit and Mega Man hanging out again, along with the entire Mario cast. And Link, too. So for the sake of pushing things to the absolute extreme, let's just say Mega Man has successfully slipped in here. Now, Mega Man brings with him all of his different iterations. Classic, X, .exe, Volnut. Again, this series on its own is a mess. But let's focus on X for a minute. In Mega Man X, you can literally unlock the Hadouken from Street Fighter as an ability. And in X2, you can unlock the Shoryuken to boot. Decades later, we'd also get the fan game Mega Man X Street Fighter, which sees classic Mega Man fighting Street Fighter characters, and it was officially endorsed and distributed by Capcom themselves. So yeah, I guess Street Fighter is in too, and with that established, we can really go off the deep end. I acknowledge that this part is just insane, but the Versus series of fighting games have seen the Street Fighter cast, as well as many other Capcom characters, facing off against the rosters of other huge fictional universes. There's Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which also had Pac-Man by the way, although Pac-Man has also appeared as a racer in arcade versions of Mario Kart, so I guess this hassle wasn't really necessary to squeeze him in here anyway. And of course, there's the big kahuna, Marvel vs. Capcom. If we go over all the characters and franchises that have appeared in all of these games, my head will explode. So let's not. But we're not quite done with fighting game crossovers just yet, because Link from the Zelda games we've already established as canon via Subcon also appeared as a guest character in Soul Calibur 2. And if we expand the scope to include all the Soul Calibur games, we also eventually stumble into Star Wars? Yeah, Star Wars. And would you believe me if I told you that there's actually a secondary way to get to Star Wars from Mario? Because there is. Strap in. So, remember we talked about SimCity? In the Super Nintendo version, one of the natural disasters that can destroy your city is a kaiju attack from none other than Bowser. However, what I failed to mention is the fact that SimCity itself is merely one game in a massive series. Early simulation games in this series let you simulate just about anything. There's Sim Farm, Sim Town, Sim Earth, Sim Ant, Sim Safari, Sim Coaster, Sim Refinery, Sim Health, Sim Tunes, Sim Copter, Sim Everything. And the most well-known spin-off of this franchise is, of course, The Sims. The Sims, an iconic simulation dollhouse-style game, became such a huge phenomenon that it itself has even more spin-offs and entries than the classic Sim simulation games. 4 numbered entries, The Herbs, My Sims, Castaway, Pets, Bustin' Out. You get the point, right? But, most importantly, way down the line, decades after Bowser wreaked mindless havoc upon the streets of SimCity, a Sims 4 game pack was released called Star Wars: Journey to Batuu, which would see the Sims visiting planet Batuu from the Star Wars universe. It took a while to get here, but I told you. Star Wars. And side note, we all know Luigi would give in to the temptations of the dark side at some point, right? Just saying. In one of the more overt crossovers that I haven't mentioned yet, there's the Wii game, Fortune Street, which is a follow-up to a Japanese-only DS game in the same series. These games are basically a mix between Monopoly and Mario Party. They're board games with mini-games, and they feature both characters and stages from Mario as well as the Dragon Quest series. Dragon Quest is the longest-running JRPG franchise in history, having basically invented the entire genre, and each of these games has its own extensive lore and characters. The ambiguous timeline of which is the subject of much debate within that fanbase. However, in addition to being foundational to classic turn-based RPGs, a spin-off of Dragon Quest IV would act as an extremely early example of a roguelike game, with the Super Famicom game Tornaco's Great Adventure, Mystery Dungeon. And yeah, that's right, Mystery Dungeon. You probably didn't know it started here, as well as getting its own unique cast of characters with Mystery Dungeon 2, more commonly known as Shiren the Wanderer, but it did. In making the jump between Mystery Dungeon games and considering them canon to one another, I'm going off the assumption that the presence of the titular Mystery Dungeon itself links them all together. As you probably know, the Mystery Dungeon series, much like it did with Dragon Quest, is usually sort of just taped on to pre-existing RPG franchises to create spin-off games for them. Notable examples of this include the Tower of Druaga series, the Etrian Odyssey series, and of course, Pokemon, where most people in the West probably know the term Mystery Dungeon from in the first place. So, through this spin-off, we have opened the floodgates for Pokemon itself to enter the Mario world. And as an admittedly weak piece of secondary evidence, there are actually Pokemon cards with Pikachu dressed up as Mario and Luigi, which is actually pretty cute. Going back to Dragon Quest itself, Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince, which is also a spin-off of Dragon Quest IV, just like Tornado was, released on Switch in 2023. And in Japan, there was actually a promotional event that featured in-game decorations and monsters inspired by McDonald's? And I know what you're thinking, but just wait for it. If we rewind a bit to The Sims, that game also had McDonald's in it. So I may not like it, you may not like it, but with two pieces of corroborating evidence, I have to call it as I see it. The entire McDonald's extended universe is in fact canon to the Mario universe. And hey, you think it can't get any crazier? Well, there is one Mystery Dungeon crossover that I didn't mention yet. Chocobo's Mystery Dungeon is, of course, a Final Fantasy crossover. But, in an even more direct fashion, the Black Mage, the pseudo-mascot of Final Fantasy, actually played basketball with Mario and friends for some reason in Mario Hoops 3v3 on the DS. There were actually a few Final Fantasy characters in here, but much like Fortune Street for Dragon Quest, this little crossover opens up a whole new world for us. Final Fantasy is obviously a monumental series in and of itself, with a variety of worlds within it. But Final Fantasy is also weird, so things escalate pretty quickly. I wish there was a more dramatic build-up for this, but Final Fantasy characters appear in Kingdom Hearts. The entire premise of that game, more or less, is that it's basically a crossover between Final Fantasy and Disney? Like, the entire catalog of Disney animated films? Lion King, Donald Duck, Peter Pan, Pinocchio, it's all here. I'm gonna risk it all here and just admit that I don't really get all this stuff, and I always thought that the whole idea of a JRPG crossing over with Disney was just weird. For the map, I suppose it only makes sense that now with Marvel and Star Wars here, the mouse would rear his ugly head eventually. But I don't understand any of this, and frankly, Kingdom Hearts makes me deeply uncomfortable. So let's just move on. Okay, so let's get some more minor stuff out of the way. There's this game called I Wanna Be the Guy, which was made by one person and released as freeware. It's one of the most notoriously difficult precision platformers ever made, and why does this matter? Well, not only is the game littered with Nintendo references, but one of the major bosses is Bowser himself. And even more interestingly, there's a room in the game called the Hall of Former The Guys. You see, the guy is like a title or position one can hold, hence the title of the game, I Wanna Be the Guy. And apparently at some point, Bowser was the guy. Even more interesting is the fact that when you finally do confront the guy, he's merely a larger version of the player character, the kid. This makes it seem like the power of being the guy is potentially related to or the same as the powers that Kamek and the Magic Koopas use to create gigantified versions of Mario enemies to serve in Bowser's army. And later down the line, the kid from I Wanna Be the Guy would be brought into a more quote-unquote official material as an unlockable character in Super Meat Boy. So if Super Meat Boy also exists in the Mario world, that means so do all of the unlockable characters in that game. And there's a ton of great ones. Commander Video from the Bit Trip series, Tim from Braid, Alien Hominid from Alien Hominid, which, hey, maybe the entire Newgrounds universe is canon too. There's also Machinarium, VVVVV, Mighty Jilloff, Spelunky, Ogmo from the Jumper series, which I just did an insane deep dive into on this channel, by the way, Castle Crashers, and even Steve from Minecraft, and a Headcrab from Half-Life as well, which, out of everything on this whole map, I might be the most shocked at the fact that we've managed to make Half-Life, of all things, canon like 2 or 3 different ways. But whatever. That leaves us with very little to cover. I also added Splatoon due to the possible connections between the ink in that series and the paint prominent in Mario 64 and Sunshine, which I mentioned as an Easter egg at the end of the last video. Then there's Mario BS Excitebike, which was a Satellaview game where the Mario cast races through the courses of Excitebike, cementing that game as canon as well. And in keeping with the sports theme, there's Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games, as well as the absolutely bizarre appearance of Mario characters as playable characters in NBA Street V3. And, you know, it's something that is definitely true of some of the other material on the map so far, but with these games in particular, I just can't ignore something. You've noticed it too, right? Mario and Sonic in London, Mario and Sonic in Rio, Mario, Luigi, and Peach playing street hoops with actual humans. I'm afraid I have to follow this to the only place it leads. Our home planet, Earth, is canon. 4.6 billion years ago, from a swirling cloud of colliding dust particles, the Earth was formed slowly over a span of millions of years. One atmosphere, a moon, and millions of years later, life emerged, and yes, we're going to consider the entirety of recorded human history to be canon. Of course, none of this stuff really matters, and most of it is totally boring. Until one day, humans would take their first step from the darkness of the cave and finally achieve something that set them apart from mere beasts. The invention of the video game. And, okay, now that we've reached a civilized point in Earth's history, let me just say, this Earth, our Earth, is literally the setting of a lot of the games we've already talked about previously, especially on the further edges of the map. It made more sense to arrange them according to their route to canonicity rather than waiting to place them here geographically, despite the fact that these games take place straight up on Earth, and often specifically in Japan, the same place where a young Shigeru Miyamoto would eventually create Mario. Well, really Donkey Kong with Mario in it. And no, Jumpman is not a different person. The actual creation of Mario being a canon event within the fictional Mario universe is not only confusing, it's outright paradoxical, especially when you consider that we see the fictional in-universe Mario visiting the real world in which his fictional universe was created. I mean, if Earth is canon, everything is canon, right? I mean, if Earth is canon, I'm canon. This map is canon. You're canon. But don't get too bogged down with that right now. There's a larger purpose to it all. The success of Donkey Kong in particular would lead to the creation of the Famicom, or NES, and the existence of these consoles also confirms another Nintendo series within the canon, Animal Crossing. The blurring of lines between the clearly fictional and the real-world elements is only going to get worse from here. And a notably less fun real-world invention that we kind of skipped over was the nuclear bomb. And this is a huge deal. Not because of the real-world implications of man wielding the power to destroy itself or any of that boring stuff, but because a certain Nintendo franchise's lore relies on the eventuality of total nuclear apocalypse. Okay, so the mysterious planet that the Pikmin series takes place on, referred to as PNF 404 in-game, is more or less confirmed to be a post-apocalyptic Earth. Various household objects appear as treasures, gigantic in size compared to the game's characters, and the Geiger counter treasure in Pikmin 1 is an ominous hint that the cause of the planet's current state is a result of nuclear war, with the radioactivity reading being concerningly high. But there's a whole host of other planets that are also confirmed via this revelation. Captain Olimar, the game's protagonist, comes from the planet Hakatate, a distant planet that is home to the native Hakatatian species, including many of the other characters in the series. Furthermore, Pikmin 3 features Kopites from the planet Kopai, and Pikmin 4 features a whole smorgasbord of Hakatatian-esque species that come from a whole host of other planets that we don't actually get to see. If we really dig into the dialogue regarding all of these planets, we could probably piece together a more definitive history of this star system, but for the purposes of this map, it's just worth noting that this system as a whole, where the Pikmin protagonists originate from, exists as well, separately from both the Earth and the Mario planet itself. And back on the ruined Earth, during the events of the Pikmin games, players can also find a bunch of treasures that are real-world Nintendo games. This, again, is weird. The games themselves exist, but as pieces of media, meaning that the fictional universes in them are not canon, I guess, just the existence of the actual games. Some notable examples are Advance Wars, which is odd considering our earlier confirmation of Famicom Wars as canon, Kuru Kuru Kururin, Danbei and Hikari, and Wave Race Blue Storm. This is a lot like the NES games and Animal Crossing, and trying to make heads or tails of it is mostly meaningless. But I love Kururin, so I had to mention it. Spinning memories indeed. And so, just to bring everything full circle, there's one last thing I want to talk about. Super Nintendo World. The Nintendo theme park in real life, Super Nintendo World, which, let's be honest, is really a Mario theme park, contains a very realistic depiction of the Mushroom Kingdom, which makes one of its fun Easter eggs even more odd. Throughout the park, Pikmin can be found engaging in various activities, including carrying a coin as a treasure. So, if the park is supposed to be a depiction of the Mushroom Kingdom, and it has Pikmin in it, does that mean that Pikmin canonically end up on the Mario planet at some point? We know they originate from the post-nuclear Earth, so how would they ever end up here? I suppose that given Olimar is a space traveler, it's not too far outside the realm of possibility that he could have just taken the Pikmin to the Mario planet, but now that I'm thinking about it, is it possible that the Mario planet itself is the same planet as Earth? Is the Mushroom Kingdom the era of life that eventually blooms after the harsh post-nuclear reality of the Pikmin games? But wait, we already established that Mario himself eventually visits real-world locations to participate in the Olympics and plays basketball with present-day humans, but how? If Pikmin are spotted in the Mushroom Kingdom, and Pikmin canonically don't rise until the destruction of all humanity, how would Mario ever interact with real-world humans or any remnants of humanity? Well, it's simple. Mario is a time traveler. In Mario's Time Machine, Bowser invents a time travel device called the Timulator, which Mario uses to stop his evil schemes. This one game provides a succinct answer to almost every mystery we've encountered throughout all of these videos. Time discrepancies exposed by the Kong family tree? Timulator. All of the weird time-traveling antics of Yoshi's Island and the ensuing baby confusion? Timulator. Multiple Marios, contradictory plotlines, impossible paradoxes? Timulator, Timulator, Timulator. I get it. Finally. So now, as the grand finale, equipped with all of this knowledge, it's time for the definitive timeline as I see it. Our Earth exists and eventually perishes to nuclear war, leading to a radiation-heavy environment. The planet becomes a hotbed of bizarre life forms, and Hakatations, Kopites, and other visitors from that star system visit the planet and pillage away all of the remains of human civilization. And the planet is now on the radar of the galaxy at large. Spacefaring civilizations of all manner now know of the planet. Over time, the life forms native to the planet, which are notably mostly themed after flowers, mushrooms, and strange creatures with oversized variants of themselves, change and evolve until eventually, after hundreds of eons, intelligent life forms rise, and the Mario-era society as we know it begins to take shape. Perhaps we can even assume that the more humanoid characters in the Mushroom Kingdom, such as Mario, Luigi, etc., are actually remnants of the Pikmin star system's settlers, with toads and such being the native form of intelligent life. However, unlike the humans that came before, the mushroom people make contact with alien races earlier on in their societal evolution, leading to an unnatural injection of technology into their quaint monarchical society via outside forces, with time travel eventually being introduced and tearing apart any hope of understanding the events in a traditional linear fashion. However, on at least one of these timelines, we can also assume that much like the humans destroyed themselves with nuclear energy, the magical ink paint stuff that the Koopas meddle with creates a destroyed world timeline that leads to Splatoon. So yeah, listen, the next time someone tells you Mario doesn't have or need a story, don't believe them. Miyamoto's works are, in fact, a sci-fi epic about the cycle of life and death, the dangers of technological advancement being driven by warfare, the passage of time, and the inevitability of extinction. I'm skeptical that Bowser actually created the Timulator. He probably just took credit for it because he's an arrogant buffoon. But Mario stepping into it and plunging across the unknown represents our only escape, the overcoming of time itself. He transcends his humble roots as a plumber turned local hero and takes his final step into being a cosmic god, an unstuck-in-time defender of the universe, a force beyond our comprehension. Whether you want to take it even further than me and rope in pretty much every fictional universe ever created via 6 degrees of separation, or don't care about any of this and think it's all completely insane, two things remain true. Mario is eternal. And I am Backseat Sakurai. I'll catch you later.